Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Dr. Karen McDonald, coming to you today from Washington, D.C., from the George Washington University. And I am joined by a most spectacular team that will introduce ourselves in just a second. The title of today's webinar is Integrating Female Genital Mutilation and Cutting Awareness and Action into Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services. And before we get started, disclaimer, we are funded and supported by the Office on Violence Against Women from the U.S. Department of Justice. And therefore, the opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations that are expressed in today's webinar are those of ours and do not necessarily reflect the views of the U.S. Department of Justice. Let's get started today first with a poll question to get you all started. And here is our first question. How many of you are aware of FGMC in your community? And the responses are yes, I am aware, no, I am not aware, or I don't know. All right, fantastic. As you can see, we have a very informed, and here are the results, an informed audience with us today. So thank you. Okay, well, today's agenda, what we want to cover, first are, of course, our welcome. We're going to also provide an overview of FGMC, a little recap of FGMC, sort of a 101. Then we're going to have a conversation with two spectacular members about how to integrate FGMC into domestic violence and sexual assault services in real life. Talk about approaches and strategies, show you some other T and TA other opportunities, and then some questions and answers. First, who are we? First, we're going to introduce ourselves, but we'd also like to hear about who you are. So in the chat, if you wouldn't mind sharing your name, where you're coming from, and what brought you to our training today. So who is this FGMC Technical and Training Assistance Team? Here we are, not necessarily knowing how to do a selfie, but we try. We are from 4 different organizations: SAHIO, the US to End FGMC Network, George Washington University School of Public Health, and the Global Woman Peace Foundation. And you can find out more about each of these organizations and our TA in general from our link tree in the link that is provided below, as well as I'll pause here for a second and you can actually do our QR code where you can find out more information about the training and technical assistance that we can provide to you. With that, I'm going to turn this now over to my colleague, Angela Peabody from the Global Woman Peace Foundation to present an overview of FGMC. Angela?
Thank you, Karen, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to have you here. We will just stick, we know that you're such an informed audience. You already know all about FGMC, but we will just do a quick overview of it. According to the World Health Organization, FGMC involves the partial or total removal of the external female genitalia or other injury to the female genital organs for non-medical reasons. So we have, from the graph on the screen, you can see an image that shows a vagina that has had no FGMC done to it. And then you'll see type 1, the clitoridectomy, which refers to the partial or total removal of the clitoris and or the prepuce. Then type 2 is referred to as the excision, when the clitoris and or the labia minora have been removed. And then type 3 is referred to as the infibulation, which occurs when the vaginal opening is sealed by cutting and repositioning the labia minora and or the labia majora with or without excision of the clitoris. And then type 4 is referred to just other types, other things that you do to the female genitalia, such as pricking, piercing, incising, scraping, cauterizing. So let's look at some of the justifications that those who practice FGMC give reason for doing it, why they do it. It's to control sexuality, of course. They say marriageability. They believe that their daughter is not marriageable if she isn't cut. Then rite of passage. Usually they say it's the rite of passage into womanhood. Religion, of course, they always blame it on religion, which has nothing to do with religion at all. And then health and hygiene. They claim that it's hygienic for the girl to be cut, and we all know that that is not true. It has nothing to do with hygiene, not with the female genitalia. And then aesthetics, and sexual pleasure. They use that as justification as well. And so many other, a myriad of other reasons they can give to justify why FGMC should be done to the girl. Now, looking at this chart, who is at risk in the US? You look at the map, and this map is old, but it's still the same statistics where all the darkened area states on this map are the states that are, according to the Population Reference Bureau, those are where most of the girls are concentrated in the US that are at risk of FGMC. According to the Population Reference Bureau, more than 500,000 girls in the United States are either at risk of FGMC or they've already experienced it. And we know that we like to remind you that that number is just an approximate number, because we believe that it's much higher than 500,000 girls, more than 500,000 girls in the United States. And let's go to the next slide. States, it's good to see this map, because I remember when the state of Virginia passed their law, we were the 25th state in the US to pass a law against FGMC. And to see today that the white background of states are states that have not passed laws in the US. So the orange background are the states that have passed laws in the US, including the District of Columbia, which was the most recent to pass their law. So it's good to see that this map has really, the color has changed to show that so many states, I believe 41 states plus the District of Columbia currently today have laws against FGMC. And we are still working, we're not giving up on states that don't have laws. So if you see this map and you're in the audience and you know that your state, you identify your state on this map, that it doesn't have a law against FGMC, you might want to write to your state senator or your state representative and inquire as to why they don't have a law against FGMC. And thank you. I believe I will turn it now back over to Karen. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Angela, for providing an overview of what FGMC is. Now what I'm going to do is we're going to do one quick poll question as we get ready to have our conversation about integrating FGMC into DVSA services in real life. So our next poll question is now going to be live. And here we go. Our second poll is how many have come across FGMC in your client population? So it's yes, no, or don't know. All right, give a couple more seconds for people to respond. And I'll ask that Maria and Orchid and Angela put on your video. We can get started with our conversation. I'll end the poll here and I'll share the results. Okay, so we do have a number of people here today who have come across FGMC in their client population, but a number of those have that don't know or have not to their knowledge. So today's webinar is going to be really informative and I hope interactive. With that, Angela, do you want to get us started with our conversation today?
Sure. I have a question for Orchid. Orchid, let's start with you. Could you provide an introduction of your organization, um, Asian Women's Shelter, your role in it, and the services you provide to our audience?
I'm happy to. Hi, everyone. I have to start with an apology that my voice is in a state of congestion, so I'm going to be doing my best, but definitely um have a cough drop swirling around in there that will probably come through in the Zoom sound, so sorry. My name is Orchid, and I am currently the executive director at Asian Women's Shelter in California. I st excuse me, I started there. I started working at Asian Women's Shelter not as the executive director, um, but first as an hourly language advocate in 2001, and then joined as staff in 2002, and have been there ever since. Um, a quick overview for you all of our organization, because I obviously want to answer the question, and because it's really relevant to our focus of the webinar today. Um, we opened in 1988, and at that time, we're still in San Francisco. We opened in San Francisco at that time as the third culturally responsive or culturally specific domestic violence shelter program in the United States. Um, the first was in Los Angeles, second one in New York City, third one was us. And we opened with a 24-hour crisis line and a residential emergency domestic violence shelter. And both of those programs are still with us today. They were our beginning, and um, they carry through all the years until 2025 and beyond. And then over the course of the years, we've built and added other programs to go with those two. Um, the main gist that I want to give you all about the organization is that addressing this intersection of culture and violence was the very beginning. It was the root, the cause, the everything of our organization, and that addressing that intersection was part of what the shelter program looked like. It's part of, it informed what the crisis line looked like. It informed what our work in systems looked like. Um, and it informed a lot of our training of our own people around how to respond to survivors of violence, how that looked too. Today, we have um, expanded on in the housing area into an array of transitional housing programs. Um, we still have our 24/7 multilingual crisis line, which now, as we'll get to in a moment, um, definitely has gone from being 3 languages held in one person to over 40 languages held um, by at any given moment about 100 people. Um, and we have callers who are calling about domestic violence, callers who are calling about FGMC, um, and callers who want to learn about other programs that are going on at Asian Women's Shelter. And so those include um, everything on an array of from prevention to intervention to tertiary prevention, preventing the reoccurrence of violence. Um, and the last thing I'll say about our programs is we have had this trajectory of supporting smaller organizations, um, partnering with smaller organizations, and building a way so that more and more experts in their own communities can gain access to funding and resources that they need to be the stars that they are in their community. And we've started our own culturally specific programs and supported others. So, our women's services program, our programs that are focused on specific types of violence like FGMC or like human trafficking, those are part of Asian Women's Shelter today too. And I'll stop there. You can learn details that you want to learn through our website, which is our domain is sfaws.org. And of course, I'll be sharing more in response to our host's questions today.
Thank you, Orchid. And before I turn and ask Maria that same question to introduce herself, Angela just presented an overview of what is FGMC, and I'm curious, how did Asian Women's Shelter become familiar with female genital mutilation and cutting?
Um, right. I was thinking when you did the polls, like, oh, there's my answer, and then I always think if AWS were a person, what would she say? How would she respond to everything? And so there's a difference here around what I would respond and what AWS would respond with. Um, so prior to the partnership that SAEO built with AWS, we had no formal engagement with FGMC. We didn't have um, that question about are you aware of your population um, as your primary constituency as having survivors of FGMC in it? And AWS would say no, because we didn't specifically ask about it and because people didn't specifically bring it up. But were there? I'm sure there were, as there are today, but now people bring it up because we bring it up. Um, I had experience before, from my first job before I joined AWS, and that was that was part of, I think, what made some of our early conversations about it, by our, I mean specifically me and Maria, um, I think easy and relevant and important. I'll just say that.
Thank you. And so, Maria, tell us about your organization, SAHEO, and the services that you provide to our audience.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Karen. And so I'll be going into our history a little bit with Orchid a little later on, but just to tell you a bit more about SAO, we formed in 2015, so we're almost in December, we're almost 10 years old now. But our mission is to empower Asian and other communities to end female genital cutting and mutilation and create positive social change through dialogue, education, collaboration based on community involvement. And we really initially formed as this advocacy collective of South Asian and other survivors of FGC, also known as FGMs, female genital mutilation. So for those who are not familiar, we're referring to the same thing, it just goes by different names. And the impetus to start was to really acknowledge the lack of acknowledgement that FGMC was an issue and a form of gender-based violence that impacted South Asian communities, but also those living in the US. And I had grown up in a community where it occurred, so it was something that I was aware about my entire life. And so recognizing that there were many communities that were really left out of the data, and just the global picture or image of what FGMC is, we formed this really culturally sensitive safe space for survivors to get together and to really advocate for their own inclusion in the FGMC discourse and to create change in their communities. And so we utilize a lot of different collaborative grassroots programs and campaigns. And we're really known for our storytelling technique and how we utilize that both with survivors to be able to share their own stories, but how we utilize storytelling also to educate service providers, the larger public, legislators as well about FGMC. And so we do partner with a lot of service providers as well too, such as healthcare providers, to create trainings and educational materials to really help them understand how do you provide that care in a culturally grounded manner as well too. And then we work on policy advocacy. I know Angela talked about some states that don't have policies still, and so we're involved with a lot of that work as well. But that's just kind of like a high overview of SEO and the work and support that we do.
Thank you, Maria, and don't close out your mic yet because I have a I have a question for you. Most people know you as an advocate for the prevention of FGMC. That's what we all know you as. But what most people don't know that is that you have a background in domestic violence. Tell us about your background in domestic violence.
I'm happy to. And this is where my background intersects with Orchid's story as well, too. So I went to graduate school for social work in San Francisco, and have my master's in social work there. And when I was in grad school, I decided to do my thesis at the time, research around FGC in the United States, specifically within South Asian communities, and why we wanted to understand why it continued. And I really didn't know anything in terms of services that cater to populations impacted by FGMC in the United States. And so part of the reason I did that was understanding for myself why it continued, but also to build a field of knowledge on FGMC in the United States as well too. Based on that, afterwards, I started giving a few presentations and whatnot too, and so it always stuck with me. And I always thought about FGMC. It was always in the background. But while I was also in graduate school, I started just understanding gender-based violence more and the dynamics involved with gender-based violence, and eventually it led me to be connected to various domestic violence organizations. And I, after graduate school, wanted to work with various organizations, and I did work with one organization, Women in San Francisco, primarily, but I was also connected to Asian Women's Shelter, and I knew about them, and I became a volunteer. I like to tell the story about how I also did apply for a job, and Asian Women's Shelter did not hire me then, but I've long since forgiven that incident. But Orchid and I still stayed connected. And so as I was learning all of this, sort of the inside understanding of domestic violence services that were provided, shelter, non-shelter support programs, recognizing power dynamics, how it's a continued learned form of gender-based violence. All of that, again, kind of just simultaneously stayed in my head too. And more and more I recognize that, FGMC is that form of gender-based violence, and there are many similar um, uh, characteristics, I guess you could say, in terms of why FGMC continues and why other forms of gender-based violence like domestic violence continue as well. And so I worked in the San Francisco Bay Area for quite a few years. And then I also did, I wasn't just a volunteer for Asian Women's Shelter. I was also, I don't remember what the official title was, but it was like a part-time housing facilitator. But I always kept my relationship alive with Asian Women's Shelter. And then I ended up moving to Massachusetts, and that's when work around SEO started as well too. But DV is definitely where my beginning is in terms of working in just the larger field of gender-based violence.
Thank you. And so you really saw that connection through the work that you were doing in your own education and between gender-based violence and those intersections. And so you said like you moved to Boston and you sort of left us hanging. How did you then work again with Asian Women's Shelter to integrate and
Yeah,
I guess expand the
yeah.
services into FGMC?
So one thing I forgot to mention was that after I didn't get the job with Asian Women's Shelter, Orchid actually reached out to me, invited me to have lunch to talk about it. And we had this conversation about FGMC, and I told her about how I wanted to do work on that issue and how there just wasn't anything out there. And this was, I don't know how long ago, but this was a great, this was when I was still living in San Francisco, which was definitely over 10 years ago. And she was always aware of it. I think she said something like "do it" at that time too, but she was very motivating. When I came to Massachusetts, I moved here for another grad program for creative writing, which leads to SEO being storytellers as well too. But I still wanted to be connected to the domestic violence field in Massachusetts as well. And so I um, found ways to be connected, did some volunteering, some interning, got to know some of the organizations in this area as well too, but still continued to do some writing, outreach, kind of public discussions around FGMC. And eventually that led to SEO being founded. And one of the things that I did early on also was as I was getting to do more advocacy and everything around this topic, Massachusetts didn't have a state law at that time. So I became involved with that piece as well. It took us 7 years, but we passed a law in 2020 in the States. And during that time, I did a digital storytelling workshop with an organization, Amy Hills with Silent Speaks. And that was how I got connected to that was through another kind of program I did in California. But Orchid showed up as the facilitator or co-facilitator for that workshop, and I had not seen Orchid in a few years. So that was a lovely surprise. But we did this digital storytelling workshop. I decided for my story at that time, I wanted to talk about how I use storytelling as a policy advocacy tool to talk about FGMC. And then with that connection afterwards, Amy and I also connected about like, should we do more storytelling workshops specifically focused on FGMC and gather more survivors and advocates to tell their stories? And that's something that happened. We did a few workshops and eventually we reconnected with Orchid also to come back and to help us build this larger voices program, and we wanted to also work with Asian Women's Shelter as well. And so that kind of relationship history just really nicely aligned in that way. But there was we all were coming in with like different roles and experiences, and we're able to bridge. And I think we'll be talking more about that in the later questions, but we can really talk about how that partnership took off after we formally decided to do this project to integrate FGMC into Asian Women's Shelter services. Hopefully that answered, and I didn't leave anybody hanging after that.
Thank you, Maria. You answered a lot of our questions. But people on the webinar want to know how to integrate FGMC into their existing DV or domestic violence or sexual abuse services. So Orchid, as a provider of these services, what did you find facilitated the integration of FGMC into the existing DV or domestic violence services that you already provided?
So, domestic violence organizations, like any other group of any kind, there's a lot of diversity in the group. So I can speak about some of the specifics of Asian Women's Shelter that I think um, were important in building this, building in and integrating, a new component of work. Um, one of the things, one of the things about, gosh, there's many, but one of the things about AWS that I say out and about when I'm describing our organization is that when we're working with people, nothing that happens in their life is out of scope. It's not like, oh, this happened, sorry. That's not what we do. Um, you are pregnant, oh, that's not what we do. You got a cancer diagnosis, oh, that's not what we do. Everything is in scope. And because everything is connected in someone's life, there aren't siphoned off pieces that don't tangle and mix with everything else that's real in that person's life. So, so for us, that was sort of a baseline that I think was and is really important. Another baseline that I think is important is that we are related, is that, you know, we have an organization where there's a tremendous there's tremendous cultural diversity. And what I mean by that is not just race and ethnicity, but really full-fledged understanding of culture. So there definitely is a lot of ethnic diversity. There's also a huge age range in our staff. There's people who've had a full 40, coming on 40 years of career as a working, earning person. There's people who are 22 in their first job. There's people who are older in their first job. And so when we talk about anything, absolutely anything, we have to be really, um, I think of it as multilingual, but it's like we can't just develop our own set of jargon and just use it and everybody understands. Everybody does not understand, and that doesn't serve a movement to only talk in your own jargon. So we have this ongoing effort to speak in a way that as many people as possible can understand. So that when we come into, you know, things that are going on with someone's health or someone's body, a survivor's health or a survivor's body, there's some parts of the body where there isn't that much. Those differences don't mean that much. If you're talking about you slammed your finger in the door, we have ways to say there isn't a lot of stigma. It's not taboo. It's fine. Probably the way the 60-year-old says finger and the way that the 22-year-old says finger is the same. And across languages, we have ways to look things up and explain what we mean and to say that somebody needs care because their finger got slammed on the door. But when we looked into, before we started with the formal work of integrating FGMC, or I guess you could just say this was the beginning of integrating FGMC, I thought, oh my goodness, I wish we had done this before because we should all do this before. Way before FGMC, we should all, especially if we're working with women, girls, teens, tweens, whatever, we should be talking about how we all talk about our bodies, how we all understand our bodies, the health and safety and the care of our bodies, but we don't. So, so when we were starting this project, I was like, oh my gosh, as an organization, we've done this in a lot of areas. A lot of areas. We're always like, how do we talk about these things? Now say it in your language, my language, your language. Um, but we have to do it with the topic of FGMC and specifically with the details of our bodies and the details of our bodies that do have cultural stigma, that are referenced with formal and informal language, that are very specific to where you're from, what generation you're in, etc. So, so that piece about understanding culture and stigma and language and talking about it comfortably, even if not about specifically FGMC, I think was a baseline that helped us, that that made us more ready to get started. Um, Maybe I'll stop there and see if there's anything else around what might have anything else that you want to know about in terms of what might have readied AWS as a domestic violence organization to move into um, partnership and integration around FGMC.
Thank you, Orchid. You did a good job. And your voice is holding up.
I know, I'm sorry.
You're doing a
It's
great job.
so it's a little awkward, um but I hope you can understand.
You know what though? I'll pose this next question to Maria and give you a break and think about sort of the preparation that you had. So Maria, from your perspective, sort of coming from the outside and working with a DV service provider, from your vantage point, what did you see as facilitators of that process of integrating FGMC into AWS services?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our project was a 3-year long project. I'll preface it with that too. So we did have time to really think about how to prepare AWS too. And um, we were doing multiple things in this project. And one of them was to create tools, so additional stories that could be utilized to train service providers. We already had a few, but we wanted to create more. We also wanted this to be an intervention for survivors as well, too. So there was that piece. But in terms of actually training staff, volunteers at AWS, one of the first things we did was a survey, kind of like to basically understand the landscape, how familiar people were, what was their general understanding of what FGMC was, what was their awareness of the global prevalence, the impact of this form of gender-based violence, any familiarity that they might have around US legislation or statewide legislation on the topic, and then how prepared did they feel to support survivors or those that were at risk as well. So we really felt like we needed to understand um, those elements to better understand what does training look like, what does education look like, and a big learning definitely is that there needed to be quite a lot of education, and that looked very differently from storytelling to official trainings to just discussions that we would have, and we had discussions throughout as well too, to really prepare staff before the actual integration of services, before that could even be opened up. And so I think the survey we originally did was to approximately about 20 individuals at AWS, if I remember correctly. And from that survey, many people found it to be important, but also many people felt like they did not have the skills or didn't really know how to respond or wouldn't know where to give resources, which was not surprising for us, having worked on this issue area for a while. And so we formulated a training program plan. There was continuing education throughout the 3 years, but I think there was more of that in the first year as well too, maybe first year and a half. And so we gave various training webinars. That was one of them. And the webinars that we decided on were based on that initial survey as well too, recognizing kind of what were the themes that people said that would be helpful. So we did our first one was always kind of a general overview of what FGMC is, but then we did deeper dives into the physical health, one on the mental health, one on support on services, specifically available for survivors of FGMC. We also invited guest speakers that could come and who had more expertise in some of those areas than Sayo did and who could speak with individuals. Simultaneously, we were also learning from advocates what kind of tools would be helpful in their training and education. So thinking about the crisis line counselors at AWS, for instance, too. We prepared as many different documents. I think we had one that was like a case scenario document, which we're really thinking about like what are situations that we've experienced as an organization and what are potential experiences that those that might work on a support line might encounter as well too. And then also looking at our videos and the story. So our videos are created by survivors, and they are telling a story about themselves or how FGMC has impacted them in some way. So some of them talk about experiences with healthcare providers or with other service providers or with another family member. So they really helped in terms of creating case studies for us that we could utilize and think about if somebody comes to you with this situation, how would you be able to talk with them about it? So that was one of the resources. We created a referral list. FGMC, this is true nationwide in terms of there just is a lack of support services out there, or it's changing, but it is something that is out there. So that was a concern for many people in terms of like, who do we refer folks to if they need direct services? And so we had to think about that and also just acknowledge that it's okay to uplift, as someone calls that, frustration with the lack of services, but also how do we build up simultaneously other services. So we realized that it wasn't only AWS that needed training, but partner organizations as well too. And although we couldn't go as in depth with partner organizations in this particular project, we were able to give some introductory information, which I think helped individuals understand kind of the landscape, so they have something in some sort of familiarity with it, which was helpful. And so we did that. Another thing that we found really helpful were these discussions. So if we did create these tools, for example, with our crisis line counselors, we did trainings with them, but then we would hold space where we could have discussions so they could answer questions. We still actually to this day are doing I think we're doing them every other month, the check-in calls with the crisis line counselors. So we talk with them about if they've received a call and just kind of debrief and chat about that. And if there's anything that on sales end we can help support with, because again, finding out, even though that project officially is over, there still is that need for that continued education, that continued support, right? And just recognizing this is a learning process for everyone continually as well. And so those were things that we realized is just being prepared, trying to, as best as possible, create materials that we could to help staff get prepared. And then working with them to actually open it up, their crisis line, and think about what are other things that might be needed for continued support after it's opened as well. So I'll stop there, but that was a little bit of what we did. And maybe Orchid, if there's anything I've forgotten that you think is important to add, you can do so.
Well, I really appreciated everything you just said also because it just helped my brain like dig through to some more clarity around two other pieces that I think are part of what I would put forward to domestic violence organizations as features to nurture um, toward being able to integrate FGMC. One of those is that we were lucky that at Asian Women's Shelter, the concept of violence against women or the concept of domestic violence was never an extremely rigid. We didn't just adopt a definition put forward by a funder or adopt a definition put forward by an academic paper or adopt any outside, you know, definition with really rigid boundaries. And we really just lived it with survivors. Um, so from the very beginning of Asian Women's Shelter, our very first households, for example, we had trafficking survivors. Before that was a term, certainly before the TVPA, certainly before legislation or funding, but it was co-occurring in the community, and so it was part of our work. So that sort of recognition that the taking away of health and safety and autonomy happens in a intersecting way means that the work that we do to bring more health and safety and autonomy has to be, you know, as convoluted or robust. Um, also, the other the other thing is this whole thing around safety planning and the crisis line that you brought up and the crisis line counselors is that for domestic violence agencies, it can be very easy in the field to think of safety planning in a narrower and narrower and narrower way across time. And as you get more resources as a field, you can actually lose some of, I mean, it's always good to have resources. I'm not saying it's bad to have resources. We want to have resources and stay as agile and flexible as, and creative as we were before we had the resources. So in domestic violence work, it can be very easy to get narrower and narrower until safety planning is just about the go bag for when you're going to leave in a life-threatening emergency. That's part of safety planning, but it's just one little part of it. And so much, there's so much that an informed, conscientious, compassionate peer counselor can do with someone around increasing their sense of being prepared, around understanding their own situation, around knowing what their options are and being able to choose them, plan for them and choose them in moments that are really tense, as well as plan for them specifically when things are not tense. And I think that that is an expansive view of safety planning that I care a lot about. I mean, it's one of the things I care the most about in our field. And so when we were working with our crisis line counselors, it was like perfect. Like, this is another realm of safety planning. This could be safety planning around how to protect your niece when you go on vacation. This could be safety planning about how you're gonna emotionally safety plan for yourself because you're gonna bring something up to a family member or a parent or a grandparent. There's so many realms of safety planning for FGMC that correlate with safety planning for domestic violence if domestic violence holds that broad, open, creative, supportive view of safety planning that's not just about leaving.
Thank you. And it really sounds like in both of you working together, like a stages of change approach that had happened, where you had the contemplation, you engaged in the preparation, you now see contemplation, preparation, in action. Now you're in maintenance and implementation. So now so many people that are looking to do what you both did. And you've cleared that initial hurdle of taking that action and implementation. So what advice do you have for organizations seeking to design or implement programs, campaigns, whatever it is in their services, safety planning, that integrate FGM with domestic violence or sexual assault? I open that to either of you.
I'll just share. I think one thing is um, recognizing the importance of collaboration and partnerships, right? So I feel like with this project, there was three main entities involved, and we had built relationships over the years too, which was wonderful. But even if we hadn't built it, we had that safe space to be able to dialogue and discuss, and then also really think about each organizational strength and knowledge area and kind of how to tap into that. So, for example, uh, I think one of the things that we did and we learned we had to do was a challenge was that many people are not as familiar with FGMC. So sometimes it can feel like this foreign kind of issue area. Like that seems like I don't know how to even begin to handle it or feel daunting in that way. And that definitely came up. But once we really made that space to talk about it and also connect the elements a little bit more broadly. So, for example, talking about what are the power dynamics and other forms of GBV that you've worked in. So, just kind of starting out like, what do you know? And then helping them make those connections to FGMC. So, one thing that I often say is FGMC is learn gender-based violence because it is something that happens to children, and then children oftentimes women are carrying it on to women oftentimes too, and that's how it continues. And just thinking about what we know with DV, right? We know that research shows that unfortunately children that witness it oftentimes grow up and can undergo it themselves, either as a survivor or as an abuser as well. So just kind of thinking about those elements, thinking about power and control in terms of like how gender dynamics work and how there is this enforcement of rigid gender dynamics with FGMC as well too. So just kind of making those connections, or also thinking about with that scenario, like, okay, how would you, if there's somebody who's experienced DV that's telling you their story, how would you respond? How would you provide that validation, that comfort, helping them recognize they're not alone in their situation? And I think a lot of survivors of FGMC need to hear that as well and recognize that they're not alone as well, you know. So there are just kind of those elements in trying to talk through those shared learnings. And that was just really important. And when you're trying to build out programming, connecting to what already is a skill set, you know, known for advocates in that area can help them build that bridge to being able to also support survivors of FGMC. That's just one thing.
Orchid?
Yeah. um, I agree with everything Maria just said. And I'll add a couple sort of DV.org perspectives. One about funding and one about time management, just to be really pragmatic, really blunt. Um, I think an organization um, needs to make a commitment. This isn't the first time AWS has made this commitment. This isn't, again, a brand new concept. It's helpful that it was there already. That some of our most marginalized populations are never gonna have the gift of consistent funding. It's not there yet, but our movement isn't just about that. Obviously, we need funding all the time because you can't have whole careers and a movement pushing forward without some, viable financial responsibility being taken by more than just, the people driving these organizations. But um, as organizations, we have a commitment to explore and to plan for if we want to keep some of the initiatives or programs that are for populations of survivors, populations of community, whatever, um, held while they're not being held by funding sources. So that, talking that through internally with board, with staff, is something that I think ensures that it will live on in more than just one person. Like it's not enough for it to be one executive director or one program person. It has to be more institutionalized. Um, the second thing is time management, which is that also if an organization takes on a new component, integrates in a new component into their work, their mission, it's never going to be that you get one grant and then your caseload just flips over on itself. And suddenly, the majority of your cases, the majority of your calls, the majority of your blah, blah, blah is going to become the new work area. It just doesn't happen like that. Um, so, what we need are strategies to make sure that um, the integration over time is supported, meaning we keep like everybody's looking. I mean, our organizations are not organizations where there's just tons of free time and we're just hanging out working on our own education about GBV issues. The direct service, if you do direct services as a core part of your organization, that workload is crushing. It just is. You can try to put up whatever walls, whatever boundaries, whatever, it's crushing. It's huge. So if the new issue doesn't become the majority of your caseload, then you need to proactively find ways to pull it back into people's frame of view, even if when it's a minority of their 40 hours. So at a really practical level, that's just like look across the 40 hours, look across the quarters or the semi-annuals or these blocks of time that we measure in organizations and try to find where the space naturally occurs that you can bring the material back into people's center of focus. So maybe that's a part of the staff meeting. Maybe that's, you know, every week that's what we do. Maybe it's like the monthly learning lab where you're practicing skills. You can make sure that there's case studies about that. And this isn't just for FGMC, this is for any new area or population that is not the majority of your organization's work, but that you have a commitment to. Because if it's not proactive, they will slip off into the margins and disappear. That's just what will naturally happen.
Well, thank you. This has been incredibly informative. I do have a couple of questions that we received from some of our participants prior to, we sent out a poll, but I do want to honor that we said that we'd be here for an hour. We have one more poll that we want to know about from you all. Oh, here we go, poll. And I think, here we go. One last one for everybody. And that is, did it not come up? Stop sharing. Okay. Does your organization have policies or procedures around FGM? So yes, you do. No, but you're interested to learn more, or don't know. And as people are continuing to fill out the poll, one of the things, and Orchid, you talked about this, one of the questions we got, I'm going to try and put it into one big question. We had about 5 questions. I'm going to try and put them together. One is, providers have, because they haven't asked about it, they don't have any idea if their clients have experienced FGMC. So one is, do you recommend that they ask everyone? And the second is, as you said, time management. You guys are asked to do so much. What advice do you have for someone like me, who is a director, to encourage staff to learn about or ask about FGMC? Like, what's the first thing that service providers should do?
Um, I have it gets right into the realm of opinion. I think that the first thing to get service providers with the crushing direct service workload to do to learn is to feed it into their existing schedule. If it's new and on your own at the same time, for our people doesn't work. It just doesn't. So new and I'll manage the time to squeeze it into this slot that already exists in your calendar has worked.
I love that. All right, so I know we are at time. I do want to let you guys know, to all of our participants, you are not alone. That's why we're here. So we as a group are funded to help with this TTA, to help you design how to integrate FGMC into your services that you provide. We do this through webinars such as this, through one-on-one technical assistance. We have regular office hours. We have learning collaboratives, and we have an online living resource hub. You can find everything, including our recordings from previous webinars, by following our link tree, or you can actually scan the QR code here. I just want to say, on behalf of our entire team, thank you so much for joining us, and please do not hesitate to reach out with any questions at our website, at our email address at fgmctta@gwu.edu. And I just want to say thank you so much to Angela, Maria, and Orchid for joining us today and providing such valuable information to how we can not see things as separate siloed issues, but how we have to integrate things and be ready to take action. So thank you all so much. And thank you to everyone for joining us today.